Have you ever wondered if the story of Noah's Ark you learned as a child is the whole story? We all know about the animals, the rainbow, and Noah's family. But what if I told you the most crucial and terrifying detail was left out? What if the Great Flood wasn't just about punishing wicked men, but about annihilating two specific, powerful groups of beings that God Himself ordered to be excluded from the Ark? This isn't just a forgotten footnote in history. Understanding who they were and why they were left to perish is a key that unlocks a deeper understanding of spiritual warfare, divine judgment, and the very nature of salvation. Are you prepared to discover what was really happening in the shadows of Genesis? Today, we are pulling back the veil on this ancient mystery. The truth is, the beings left outside that ark represent a level of corruption so profound it threatened to extinguish the light of humanity forever. Your eternal security could be strengthened by understanding the lines that cannot be crossed in the eyes of God. What you are about to learn will not only change how you see Noah's Ark, but it might also change how you see the spiritual battle happening around you right now. Before we dive in, I've noticed that a huge number of people who find their faith deepened by these videos haven't yet subscribed. If you feel a stirring in your spirit to uncover these profound biblical truths, please take a single moment to hit that subscribe button. Don't let the algorithm hide these vital messages from you. Now, let's uncover the truth about the ones left behind. Well now, let's talk about a story you've probably heard since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. The tale of Noah's Ark. It's a classic, isn't it? A righteous man, a massive boat, pairs of every animal, and a world-cleansing rain. It's a story of faith, obedience, and divine rescue that we've told our children for generations. But what if I told you that the simple, almost fairy tale-like version we all know is just scratching the surface? What if there's a deeper, darker, and far more complex reality hiding just beneath the waters of that great flood narrative? We often focus on who got on the ark, but the real spine-chilling mystery, the one that holds a crucial key to understanding God's plan, is about who was deliberately left off. Think about it for a moment. The Bible is incredibly specific, and every detail matters. The command was clear: bring two of every kind. Yet, the story quietly holds back a stunning revelation about beings so powerful, so corrupt, that they were not only excluded, but marked for utter annihilation by a divine judgment so absolute it would reshape the world. This wasn't just about saving the good. It was about eradicating an evil that threatened the very fabric of creation, an evil born from a rebellion that began in the heavens with the fallen angels. You see, the Sunday school version often glosses over the sheer gravity of the situation. We picture a world that was simply bad, but the scriptures paint a far more terrifying picture. We're talking about a level of corruption so deep, so pervasive, that it grieved God to His very heart that He had even made man. Genesis 6:6. This wasn't just about people being unkind to one another. Oh no, it was much more sinister than that. It was a time when the lines between the heavenly and the earthly were blurred in the most unholy of ways. It was an era dominated by the terrifying presence of the Nephilim, beings of immense power and malevolence who were a direct result of the rebellion of those fallen angels. The construction of Noah's Ark, therefore, wasn't just a building project. It was a declaration of war. It was God drawing a line in the sand, a final, merciful offer of escape before the inevitable divine judgment would fall. The rhythmic pounding of Noah's hammer was a sermon preached for 120 years, a constant echoing warning of the coming great flood, a testament to God's patience, but also a promise of His unwavering justice against an irredeemable evil. So let's peel back the layers together. What if the story of Noah's Ark isn't just about a flood that washed away sin, but about a targeted spiritual cleansing? What if the primary targets of this divine wrath weren't even human, Prepare yourself, because we're about to venture into the unsettling shadows of Genesis, chapter 6. I'm going to ask you a question that might shake up what you thought you knew. What if I told you that two specific, enigmatic, and terrifyingly powerful groups of beings were left outside that ark by a direct, unappealable command from God Himself? This question changes everything. It reframes the entire narrative from a simple story of rescue to an epic account of cosmic warfare. It forces us to confront the reality of the fallen angels and their monstrous offspring, the Nephilim, and to understand why their exclusion was so critical for the future of all humanity. This wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate act of divine surgery on a world riddled with a spiritual cancer. The implications are staggering, my friend. Understanding who was left behind gives us a profound insight into the very nature of God's holiness and His unyielding opposition to that which seeks to corrupt His creation. It's a lesson that echoes through eternity. The story of the great flood and Noah's Ark is a stark reminder that while God's mercy is as wide as the ocean, His judgment is just as deep. He is a God of second chances, but not of infinite tolerance for rebellion. The sealed door of that ark became a symbol of a definitive choice, a final separation between the sacred and the profane. The coming storm wasn't just water, it was holy fire in liquid form, sent to purify the earth from the defilement brought on by the Nephilim and their celestial fathers, the fallen angels. Their story is a chilling testament to the fact that there are some lines that, once crossed, can never be uncrossed, leading to a divine judgment from which there is no escape. As we move forward, we're not just going to retell a familiar story. We're going to uncover the hidden truths that lie within it. We'll explore the why behind this divine decree. Why were these beings considered so dangerous, so irredeemable, that they had to be completely wiped from the face of the earth? Who were they really? And what does their exclusion from Noah's Ark teach us today about our own spiritual walk, about the choices we make, and about the ever-present battle between light and darkness? The story of the Great Flood is far more than ancient history. It's a living, breathing lesson about the consequences of rebellion and the incredible grace offered to those who, like Noah, choose to walk faithfully with God. The story of the Nephilim and the fallen angels isn't just a footnote. It's the very reason the ark was needed in the first place. So let's dig deeper into the world that was, a world teetering on the brink of utter destruction. Now, to truly grasp the weight of what happened with Noah's Ark, you've got to understand just how far the world had fallen. We're not talking about a society that was just a little rough around the edges. Genesis 6:5 tells us that the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Man, just let that sink in. Every single thought was bent toward evil. This was a world suffocating in its own spiritual filth, a planet consumed by violence and perversion. It was a darkness fueled by more than just human weakness. It was a strategic corruption, an infection introduced by the rebellion of the fallen angels, which set the stage for the coming divine judgment. But in the middle of all this chaos, there was one man, a single point of light in an ocean of darkness. Noah. The Bible describes him as a righteous man, blameless in his generation, who walked with God. Genesis 6:9. Can you imagine the strength of character, the sheer tenacity of faith it took to remain faithful in a world like that? While everyone else was lost in the shadows, Noah was listening to God, and so he was given a monumental task to build Noah's Ark. This wasn't just about wood and nails, my friend. It was a physical act of obedience, a floating testament of hope, and a final, merciful warning before the great flood was unleashed upon a world that had forgotten its creator. The Ark itself became a silent sermon. For over a century, as Noah and his family worked, it stood as a powerful symbol. It was a promise of salvation for those who would turn back to God, but also a stark, unavoidable reminder of the coming divine judgment for those who wouldn't. While the violent influence of the Nephilim spread and the teachings of the fallen angels poisoned humanity, that vessel was God's line in the sand. It represented the separation of the pure from the profane. The world had made its choice, and God was preparing his response. But this judgment wasn't random. It was aimed at the very root of the corruption, at the unnatural beings who had filled the earth with violence. So let's pull back the curtain on the first group that was unequivocally barred from Noah's Ark, the Nephilim. The Bible introduces them in Genesis 6:4 as the offspring that came from the unholy union of the sons of God and the daughters of men. Now, hold on, because this is where the story takes a sharp turn from a human drama to a cosmic conflict. These weren't just tall people. The Nephilim were a hybrid race, a grotesque perversion of God's creation. They were a direct result of heavenly beings, the fallen angels, abandoning their rightful place to defile humanity. As such, they had no part in God's covenant and no place on the vessel of salvation. These beings became the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown, but their fame was built on bloodshed and terror. They were the personification of the violence that filled the earth. Think of them as a spiritual cancer, spreading chaos and corruption wherever they went. Their existence was an act of defiance against the divine order, a living, breathing symbol of the deep-seated rebellion that triggered the divine judgment. The Great Flood wasn't just to wipe away human sin. It was a specific, targeted act to eradicate this unnatural lineage from the face of the planet. They were a contamination that had to be cleansed. You see, the Nephilim were the fruit of the rebellion, but they weren't the root. As terrifying and destructive as they were merely the consequence of a much deeper, more sinister decision. They were the symptom of a disease that had its origins in the heavens. To truly understand why the judgment of the Great Flood was so absolute, we have to look beyond these monstrous giants and turn our eyes to their progenitors, the true architects of this entire catastrophe, the fallen angels themselves. They were the ones who orchestrated this rebellion from the start. All right. Now we get to the very heart of the rebellion, the masterminds behind the Nephilim, the fallen angels. These are the sons of God Genesis spoke of, celestial beings who made a catastrophic choice. Their sin was not a simple mistake, it was high treason against the throne of God. They willfully abandoned their glorious position in the heavens. As Jude 1:6 tells us, they did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode. They chose to forsake their purpose and directly interfere with humanity, orchestrating a plan to corrupt the human bloodline and drag creation into their own rebellion. This was the ultimate act of cosmic defiance. Their impact was devastating. These fallen angels weren't just the progenitors of the Nephilim, they were the teachers of forbidden arts, the mentors of wickedness who accelerated humanity's downward spiral. Because of this, their judgment was unique. The Apostle Peter tells us that God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, 2 Peter 2:4. Notice that? Their sentence wasn't to perish in the great flood. A far more severe punishment was reserved for them: imprisonment in darkness, awaiting a final divine judgment. So you see, their exclusion from Noah's Ark was a given. They were never candidates for salvation. The Great Flood was designed to cleanse the earth of their monstrous offspring, the Nephilim, and the corruption they had sown. But for the fallen angels themselves, a different fate was decreed. They were to be bound, separated from the world they sought to ruin. This makes the next moment in the story even more powerful and final, the moment when the time for mercy ran out and the door to salvation was sealed shut, not by man, but by God himself. This brings us to one of the most sobering moments in all of Scripture. After Noah, his family, and the animals were safely inside, the Bible gives us a short, chillingly simple verse in Genesis 7:16, and the Lord shut him in. Just think about that. It wasn't Noah who pulled the heavy door closed, it was God himself. This single act is overflowing with spiritual significance. It was the definitive end of an era. The time for mercy was over, the call to repentance had expired, and the door to salvation, which had stood open for 120 years, was now irrevocably sealed by the very hand of the one who offered it. That closed door was a final, unappealable statement. It was the seal on the sentence of the divine judgment. For everyone outside Noah's Ark, including any remaining Nephilim who roamed the earth, their fate was sealed before the first drop of rain fell. This wasn't just about protection from the coming great flood. It was a profound act of separation, a division between the righteous and the unredeemable. It was God himself declaring that the world's rebellion, instigated by the fallen angels and embodied by the Nephilim, would be permitted to go no further. With that door shut, the old world was officially condemned. The period of grace had passed, and the execution of the sentence was imminent. The finality of this moment is staggering. It shows us that while God's patience is long, it is not endless. The exclusion of the Nephilim and the judgment on the fallen angels was now absolute. But this raises a perplexing question that has puzzled scholars for ages. If the cleansing was so total, how is it that we hear whispers of these very same giants hundreds of years after the flood? This leads us to that perplexing passage in Numbers 13:33. Centuries after the great flood, the Israelite spies return from Canaan and report seeing giants, saying, "We saw the Nephilim there. We seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Wait a minute. How can this be? Did the divine judgment fail? Did some of the Nephilim somehow survive, perhaps finding a way to sneak past the cleansing waters? This verse has stirred up a whirlwind of debate, and it really forces us to dig a little deeper into the word. There are a couple of main schools of thought here. One interpretation suggests a second, smaller incursion of fallen angels happened after the flood, starting the lineage anew. Another idea is that the genetic trait was passed through one of Noah's son's wives. However, a more widely accepted explanation is that the terrified spies were using the word Nephilim as a figure of speech. They saw the Anakim, a tribe of very large people, and in their fear, they used the most terrifying name they could think of to describe them, invoking the legendary horror of the pre-flood world to justify their cowardice. But here's the key takeaway, my friend. Regardless of which view you hold, the very fact that the name Nephilim still carried so much weight centuries after the flood speaks volumes. Their shadow loomed large over humanity's memory. The story of their corruption and the subsequent divine judgment was so profound that their name became synonymous with terrifying, unbeatable evil. The Great Flood was a success, but the memory of that rebellion served as a powerful, lingering lesson on the consequences of defying God, a lesson that echoes right into the heart of our own walk with Him. So as we bring this journey to a close, what's the timeless truth we can carry with us? The exclusion of the Nephilim and the fallen angels from Noah's Ark wasn't some arbitrary act. It was a powerful, divine statement about the very nature of holiness and justice. It teaches us that God will not and cannot preserve that which is fundamentally set on corrupting His creation. The Great Flood was a heart-wrenching necessity, a divine judgment to ensure that the line of humanity, the line through which a Savior would one day come, would remain pure. In the end, the story hinges on a simple but profound contrast. The Nephilim, mighty and renowned, were erased because their very nature was rebellion. Noah, a simple man, was saved for one reason. He walked faithfully with God. Genesis 6:9. Salvation wasn't earned by power or status. It was received through relationship and a heart aligned with the Creator. Noah's Ark teaches us that what God looks for isn't perfection, but a willing heart and feet that are determined to walk in His direction, even when the rest of the world is sprinting toward a cliff. This ancient story, my friend, echoes directly into our lives today. It forces us to ask, what are we allowing to take root in our hearts? Are we building a life that honors God, an ark of faith and obedience, or are we letting the corrupting influences of the world seep in? The choice, just as it was in Noah's day, is ours. The same God who sealed the door of the ark is the one who knocks on the door of our hearts. Let's make sure we're on the right side of that door when the time comes. And so, the profound lesson of the ones left behind by the ark echoes through the ages. It's a sobering reminder that our choices have eternal weight. Now, I want to hear from you. What was the most impactful part of this story for your faith? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's build a community of wisdom together. If this message resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and ring that bell so you don't miss out on our next exploration of biblical truth. And don't go anywhere. Click the video on your screen right now to uncover another powerful mystery God has hidden in His Word for us.